Well, hi there, vinyl community. Elliot here, Lazy Dogs Records, and time for another record review. I hope you're not getting tired of those. I enjoy when I get either a reissue or a new release. Sometimes I like to offer a record review to maybe introduce some people that may not be aware of it to that record or those artists, and that is the case today. Folkways Records has reissued a very important 1960s release by them, and it was on pre-order and it just shipped about 2 weeks ago. I've had a chance to listen to it 3 or 4 times, and I'd like to tell you about it, and maybe it'll pique some interest on your part for it. It is the Hazel Dickens and Alice Gerrard album, their first album, and it's called Who's That Knocking? And you see the cover there. That is a photo from 1940 from Kerr, California. Dorothea Lange took that photograph for the National Archives in 1940. And Children in California, in Kerr County, California. I think that's appropriate for the title of the album. Who's That Knocking? So, just briefly, if you're not familiar with Hazel Dickens and Alice Gerrard, I'll give you a very quick overview, because I know if this video review runs very long, nobody will watch it. So I'll try to keep it fairly short, because I really think this is something people could really get into, really enjoy. These two artists met in the 1950s in the Metro Washington, D.C. area. Hazel Dickens was raised in West Virginia. Her family moved to Baltimore, as many Southern families migrated to the big cities, especially in the North and the Midwest. Hazel left as an adult, a young adult, with her family from West Virginia to the Baltimore area, because that's where the jobs were to be had. And there's a lot of jobs in the shipyards and a lot of jobs with the U.S. government around Washington, D.C. So they're part of a outsider community, I guess you would say, in that area. First, second generation Appalachian folks. And so they had a kind of a question: are you going to reject, turn your back on your own traditions and your own customs, your own music, your own way of worship, that sort of thing, and adapt to this urban setting and the expectations people have for you there? Or are you going to hold on to those? Alice is someone that decided that to ground herself and feel good about herself, she was not going to turn her back on her family's background, and she found not only in the church but also in the music that she could have an outlet for her creativity and her love for her upbringing. So she gets involved in a very vibrant music community made up of the immigrants from the Appalachian Mountain area, and from young people interested in that music, people like Mike Seeger, for instance. Now, Alice Gerrard was from the West Coast. But she went to college in Ohio at Antioch. Alice moves to D.C. as part of work study from the college, and she meets Hazel, and they begin to work together in the 1950s. Sing in casual settings. They didn't actually perform out together until 1962, and that was at the Gaelics Fiddlers Convention in Virginia, Gaelics, Virginia. But for about 15 or more years, they worked together professionally, and this is their first album, and it was recorded and produced by Peter Siegel, who was one of those New York intellectuals that was into folk music, and who put them together and got them recording, put them in the studio and got them recording. Interestingly enough, when this was remastered in 2021, Mr. Siegel was the man that remastered it. So he's, I mean, gosh, he had to be in his 80s at that point. I would think, anyway, if he was 25 when he produced this record, then he's probably in his 80s at this point. But this is an important record because bluegrass had been around about 20 years, and there weren't very many female bluegrass artists. None that stood up, stepped up to the front of the stage. There wasn't really much of anything. I don't know when Wilma Lee Cooper, Stoney and Wilma Lee Cooper started their career, but Wilma Lee may have come before them. But there just really wasn't much. So this is an important album because this is women. These are women stepping up to the front of the stage and being the stars. And this is a really, really excellent bluegrass album. Not all their music would really be categorized as bluegrass, but this is a bluegrass album. Now, in 1965, the rules and the barometer and the yardstick for what truly is bluegrass and what is not bluegrass had not yet been established, had not yet been codified, but that was coming. And but this really, even given that, it fits the bill as a bluegrass album. Now, this is a mountain tinged bluegrass album. You've got great harmony vocals, and with the two ladies working together. It is very rural feeling, a very mountain feeling. The delivery is sometimes, I don't want to say stoic, but it's not polished like a pop star at all. It is true to the roots where it comes from. Now, of course, bluegrass was a commercial music, but it was also a folk music in that by the time this album came out, there were bluegrass, which had started really as a commercial music from Bill Monroe, and then springing forth from that in 1945. Had been rejected by contemporary country music. The radio stations weren't playing it anymore. And the young audiences in the folk boom of the 1950s and 60s, they assumed the bluegrass was mountain music, pure and simple, that it was a folk music, but it really wasn't, though it used many elements of the folk tradition in the song selections and so on and so forth. The album has lots of excellent tunes. They do some Bill Monroe tunes. They do several A.P. Carter tunes. Now, when we say A.P. Carter tunes, realize that he was a song catcher. Just because he has copyright title to the song, it doesn't necessarily mean that he physically created the melody and the lyrics for it. He went out through the mountains in search of songs, and got people to play songs for him, and they wrote them down. He had help, and he wrote them down and tried to learn the melodies and things like that. And then, of course, he filled out the paperwork to receive a copyright for those, and those became Carter family songs. That's it. Several A.P. Carter songs on here. A couple of contemporary songs, interestingly enough. I say contemporary, I mean commercial songs. They're not really done commercially in this case, but that's where they originate from. Take Me Back to Tulsa, the Western Swing song, which, if this were a traditional folk song album, you wouldn't expect to see that song on it. And what was the other that I noted? One of the songs that sounds like it should be a written 200 years ago, but was actually written as a country song in the 1950s, Long Black Veil. There are some original songs too, and written by Alice and Hazel, who is on this recording. Besides Hazel Dickens and Alice Gerrard, Lamar Greer is the Scruggs-style banjo player that appears on this album. Chubby Wise, going all the way back to the beginnings of bluegrass, fiddler on this album. He was fiddler for Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys. And a very young David Grisman as we know him today, plays the mandolin on here and does a wonderful job. So what you've got is you've got a blend. Hazel coming from the West Virginia mountains, bringing in that originality, that authenticity. Alice, a student of the music, not related to the music growing up. Her parents were into music; they were into classical music, but becoming a great student of the music, starting out when she got off to college. And you got, people who played with Bill Monroe and Chubby Wise. Lamar Greer was a D.C. area banjo player, well thought of in that community. And David Grisman from New York City, a young mandolin player who played with the New York Ramblers, I believe the name of the band was back then. So stellar instrumentation on here. And Hazel and Alice don't just sing; they are players in the group as well. I believe Hazel plays the bass and the guitar, and Alice plays the guitar and other instruments as well. But a very, very good album. I don't want to tell you too much about it because I want you to get it and hear it for yourself. I'd encourage you to check out the Folkways vinyl selections. They've got maybe not a huge selection, maybe 100 records on vinyl in their collection for sale. I bought this directly from Folkways. They have a lot of R. Hooley recordings. They bought that label, I guess, and they've got a lot of those that they either have originally from the company, have never been unsealed, and some that they've reissued. And they have several other labels they've done that way too. And a lot of interesting stuff. Bahamian guitar players, music from folk music from Africa, bluegrass music, singer-songwriters, blues music, lots of good stuff. So I'll try to leave a link to the vinyl selections at Folkways if you want to check that out. I highly encourage you to. This is a good place to start. They also released their second album on Folkways, which it took about 8 years. They went in right after they did this, soon after they did this, and recorded another album. But they kind of forgot the album was in the vault, and it took them about 8 years to say, oh yeah, we've got another one of theirs, enough material for another album from them, and released it. In between, they did 2 albums for Rounder Records that are very good as well. In later life, they announced the mid-70s or so, their partnership ended. Hazel continued to perform and was very, very involved in the rights for coal miners up in West Virginia and Kentucky and Virginia. So she was an activist for coal miners for many years. She has since passed away. Alice Gerrard, she moved to Galix, Virginia, and kind of studied and documented the work of many of those artists in the Galix, Virginia area, like Tommy Jarrell and many others. It's a hotbed for old time music in the Galix, Virginia area. And she lived there for many years. And then maybe 15 or 20 years ago, she moved to Durham, North Carolina, because she had a publication, a folk music publication, for 15 or 20 years, and there was availability to help her with that, produce that publication there in Durham, and the opportunity to teach some classes and things like that in the Durham area. So there were more resources there. So she moved to Durham. She still lives there today. She's in her late 80s, and she is still performing and still very active politically and for social. I hate to use the word social justice, but yeah, social justice. Trying to get rights and protect rights of people who are the outliers, the outsiders that get often shoved aside. Important album. Even some of the female punk artists say these two artists influenced them. Definitely influenced the bluegrass and the folk artists, female folk artists that came after them, and influenced men as well. I don't want to limit them to that, but that when you see somebody like you doing something, it's a whole lot easier to envision yourself doing that. I think that's a truth we can all agree with. And when female musicians or aspiring musicians see that artists like Alice and Hazel can be successful and be creative and produce lots of stuff that give us so much enjoyment, I think it inspires folks like them to say, okay, I can do that too. So that's it. That's my review of the wonderful album Who's That Knocking by Hazel Dickens and Alice Gerrard. Remember, everybody, be kind to your neighbors, because we're all neighbors.